There are moments in history, frozen in time, when the grand currents of human ambition collide with the unyielding forces of circumstance, shaping not just nations but the very trajectory of our shared future. One such moment, etched forever into the global consciousness, began not with a sudden explosion, but with a whisper of desire, a yearning for power, and a profound miscalculation. This is a story not just of conflict, but of the intricate dance between ambition and consequence, a powerful reminder that even the most meticulously planned actions can ignite forces far beyond their architect's control. Imagine the world in the early 20th century, a tapestry woven with the threads of burgeoning empires, technological marvels, and simmering tensions. In the East, a nation known as Japan had embarked on a remarkable journey of modernization. From a feudal society, it had rapidly transformed into an industrial and military powerhouse, looking outward with an eager, ambitious gaze. But beneath this impressive facade lay a critical vulnerability. Japan, an island nation, was acutely aware of its profound lack of natural resources. Steel mills needed iron ore, factories needed coal, and the burgeoning navy and air force, the very symbols of its newfound might, craved one thing above all else: oil. Without these fundamental building blocks, their grand vision of a self-sufficient, powerful empire, a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, was nothing more than a fragile dream. The path to empire, they believed, lay in expansion. Their first bold step came in 1931, with the invasion of Manchuria, a resource-rich region in northeastern China. The international community, still reeling from the scars of the Great War and grappling with the Great Depression, offered little more than condemnation. This lack of decisive action perhaps emboldened Japan. 6 years later, in 1937, they launched a full-scale invasion of China, igniting the Second Sino-Japanese War. It was a brutal, protracted conflict, consuming vast amounts of men, material, and precious resources. Japan sought a swift, decisive victory that would secure the resources it desperately needed. But the war became a hungry beast, draining its coffers and its resolve, without yielding the decisive outcome or the abundant resources they so craved. The dream of empire was becoming an increasingly expensive and resource-intensive nightmare. Across the vast Pacific Ocean, the United States watched these developments with a complex mix of concern and detachment. The memory of World War I was still fresh, fostering a deep-seated desire for isolationism. America first was a powerful mantra, reflecting a national sentiment to avoid foreign entanglements. However, as grim reports of atrocities from China filtered through, and as Europe plunged headlong into another devastating conflict with the rise of Nazi Germany, the moral compass of the nation began to stir. Public opinion, though slow to shift, started to lean towards intervention, initially in the form of providing aid to allies under programs like Lend-Lease. The world was shrinking, and the idea that America could remain untouched by global conflagrations was becoming increasingly untenable. Japan, desperate for new sources of raw materials, turned its gaze southward. With France defeated and occupied by Germany, its colonial possession of French Indochina, rich in rubber and other vital resources, became an irresistible target. This expansion, however, was a critical misstep, a red line for the United States. President Roosevelt, recognizing the direct threat to regional stability and American interests, responded with a series of escalating economic sanctions. First came embargoes on iron, steel, and copper, vital components for Japan's war machine. Then, in the summer of 1941, came the ultimate blow, an embargo on oil. This was not merely an inconvenience. It was a strategic death sentence. Japan, reliant on imported fuel for 94% of its oil supply, found its lifeblood severed overnight. The nation's industry, its military, its very future faced a slow, agonizing chokehold. Imagine the tension in Tokyo, the feverish debates, the desperate search for solutions. A nation fueled by ambition, now facing a stark choice: retreat, surrender the gains, Abandon the dream of empire and accept a humiliating decline. Or strike out, seize the necessary resources by force, and confront the only power strong enough to stand in their way, the United States. In the crucible of this oil crisis, fueled by a potent mix of desperation and strategic miscalculation, the latter began to seem like the only viable, albeit terrifying, option. The decision was made. To secure the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies and other resource-rich territories in Southeast Asia, Japan had to neutralize the formidable U.S. Pacific Fleet based at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The plan was audacious, daring, and deeply flawed in its long-term vision. Cripple the fleet, buy precious months to establish and consolidate their new empire, and then they believed the Americans, stunned and weary, would sue for peace. It was a gamble of epic proportions, betting everything on a single devastating blow. They underestimated the spirit of a nation, the resilience of a people, and the unforeseen consequences that such an act would unleash. And so, on a tranquil Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941, the day that would live in infamy, the trap was sprung. As the sun rose over the azure waters of Pearl Harbor, illuminating the battleships moored in neat rows along Battleship Row, their crews enjoying a rare moment of peace, no one suspected the metallic hum growing louder on the horizon. Dark specks grew into a swarm of aircraft, their rising sun insignia glinting in the morning light. The first bombs fell, shattering the calm, tearing through steel, igniting an inferno that would burn into the annals of history. Torpedoes, launched with terrifying precision, sliced through the water, finding their marks against the vulnerable hulls of American warships. Explosions ripped through the air, smoke billowed towards the heavens, and the screams of men mingled with the roar of engines and the crash of collapsing metal. The U.S. Pacific Fleet, a symbol of American power, was being torn apart. Battleships sank, listing precariously, trapping hundreds beneath the waves. Aircraft, lined wingtip to wingtip on airfields, were easy targets, erupting in flames as Japanese pilots strafed and bombed with ruthless efficiency. It was a complete surprise, a masterclass in tactical execution. 18 warships were damaged or sunk, 188 aircraft destroyed. But in the chaos, unseen, unheard, the most crucial assets of the fleet, the aircraft carriers, were out at sea, safe, and destined to play a pivotal role in the unfolding drama. The smoke eventually cleared, but the echoes of the explosions reverberated across the globe. A nation, once largely isolated, now stood on the precipice of an unimaginable conflict. The world held its breath. The attack was over, but the war, in its truest, most devastating form, had just begun. The consequences of this fateful decision, born of ambition and desperation, were about to reshape not only the Pacific, but the entire world in ways no one could have possibly foreseen. In the immediate aftermath of that devastating Sunday, it seemed, for a fleeting moment, that Japan's audacious gamble had paid off. In the halls of power in Tokyo, there was a sense of triumph. With the U.S. Pacific Fleet seemingly crippled, a golden age of expansion had opened before them. And for weeks and months that followed, Japan moved with breathtaking speed. The attack on Pearl Harbor was the opening salvo in a coordinated campaign across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. While America reeled, Japan seized its moment, sweeping through the region, occupying territory after territory. The Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies. One by one, these strategic points fell. Their forces seemed unstoppable. The oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, were a crucial prize. This was the lifeblood, the very reason for their desperate gamble. With these resources, Japan believed it had secured its future, ensuring fuel for its war machine. The vision of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere seemed to be rapidly materializing. The world watched, stunned, as Japan built its new reality. But while Japan was consolidating its gains, a far more profound transformation was occurring across the Pacific. The architects of the Pearl Harbor attack had gravely miscalculated. Not just the tactical resilience of the U.S. Navy, but the indomitable spirit of the American people. They had aimed to cripple and demoralize, to force a swift, negotiated peace. Instead, they had done something far more catastrophic to their own long-term prospects. They had awakened a sleeping giant. The images of burning battleships, the stories of heroism, the sheer audacity of the unprovoked attack, these galvanized a nation like nothing before. The isolationist sentiments that had long held America out of the escalating global conflicts evaporated overnight. The debate was over. The question of whether to engage in the world's fight was answered with a resounding, unified roar of outrage and resolve. On December 8, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before Congress, his voice steady, his words etching themselves into history. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. With those powerful words, the declaration of war was sought and swiftly granted. America was no longer a neutral observer. It was a full participant, a nation united by a common purpose, steeled by a shared grief, and burning with a righteous anger. This was the first and most significant consequence of Japan's fateful decision. The swift, decisive peace they had hoped for was now an impossibility. Instead, they had unleashed the full, unbridled might of a nation whose industrial capacity and human ingenuity were unparalleled. America, a vast continent brimming with resources and a population driven by a newfound unity, began to mobilize on an unprecedented scale. Factories that had once produced cars and refrigerators now churned out tanks, planes, and ships. Women entered the workforce in droves, becoming the backbone of the home front. Shipyards worked around the clock, constructing new vessels to replace those lost at Pearl Harbor, and then many, many more. The assembly lines of Detroit, the steel mills of Pittsburgh, the aircraft plants of California, all transformed into an unstoppable arsenal, fueling not just America's war effort, but those of its allies around the globe. The entire nation became a single, focused entity. Rationing became a way of life, scrap drives collected vital materials, and victory gardens sprouted in backyards across the country. Patriotism soared, not as a blind jingoism, but as a deep-seated commitment to defending freedom and justice. Young men, previously hesitant to join a foreign war, now flocked to recruiting stations, eager to serve, to avenge, to protect. This wasn't just a military mobilization. It was a societal metamorphosis. The isolationist giant, roused from its slumber, was stretching its limbs, revealing a strength that few, least of all Japan, had truly comprehended. The belief that America would be too focused on Europe, or too unwilling to engage in a prolonged Pacific conflict, proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Japan had inadvertently forged the very adversary it sought to avoid. The attack on Pearl Harbor, meant to buy time, instead bought Japan an enemy fully committed to total war. The initial successes, the swift occupation of resource-rich territories, were real, but they were built on a foundation of sand. For every barrel of oil seized, for every rubber plantation captured, Japan was drawing further into a conflict against an industrial powerhouse whose capacity for production and innovation far outstripped its own. The strategic genius behind the attack had been purely tactical. It lacked foresight into the psychological and long-term industrial consequences. Japan's leaders had gambled everything on a short, decisive war, failing to grasp that the very act of aggression would ignite a furious, relentless, and prolonged response. They had hoped to force America to the negotiating table quickly, but instead, they had forced America to its feet, ready for a fight to the finish. The war in the Pacific, once a distant possibility, now became a brutal reality. The initial shock of Pearl Harbor gave way to a steely determination, a resolve that would not waver. The damaged ships would be repaired, new ones built, and the lost aircraft replaced by a relentless stream of superior machines. The aircraft carriers, those crucial vessels that had miraculously escaped the inferno of Pearl Harbor, were now ready to lead the charge, becoming the spearhead of a counteroffensive that would reshape naval warfare forever. The consequences of December 7, 1941, were far more profound than any naval strategist could have predicted. Japan had poked the bear, and the bear was now awake, angry, and mobilizing its overwhelming might. The initial triumphs would soon be overshadowed by the grinding reality of a war that Japan, with its limited resources and industrial base, was fundamentally unprepared to win against such an adversary. The stage was set for a monumental struggle, a clash of empires that would determine the fate of millions and the very course of the 20th century. The true cost of ambition, unchecked by foresight, was about to be paid, in blood and iron, across the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific. The true cost of ambition, unchecked by foresight, was about to be paid in blood and iron across the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific, and so it began. The initial triumphs for Japan were undeniable, almost dizzying in their speed and scope. Like a wildfire, their forces swept through Southeast Asia, seizing the very resources they so desperately craved: oil from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, tin from various territories. They established a formidable defensive perimeter, believing they had bought themselves precious time, perhaps even enough to negotiate a peace that would solidify their gains and establish their dominance. The world watched, aghast, as the rising sun flag flew over an ever-expanding empire, a testament to audacious planning and ruthless execution. But beneath the surface of these swift victories, the seeds of their ultimate downfall were already germinating. What Japan's strategists had failed to comprehend, what their calculations had tragically overlooked, was the profound, almost primal reaction their attack would unleash in the American spirit. They had aimed to cripple a fleet. Instead, they had awakened a sleeping giant. The roar that followed the silence of Pearl Harbor was not one of defeat, but of outrage, of unity, and of an unyielding resolve that would reshape the very fabric of the nation. Isolationism, that deeply entrenched desire to remain aloof from the world's conflicts, evaporated in the smoke and fire of December 7th. It was replaced by a singular burning purpose. The American people, once divided by political ideologies and economic woes, now stood as one. From every town, every city, men and women stepped forward, ready to serve, ready to sacrifice. Factories that once produced cars and refrigerators now retooled with astonishing speed, churning out tanks, planes, and ships. The assembly lines, symbols of America's industrial might, transformed into arteries of war, pumping out the sinews of battle at an unprecedented rate. Women, who had previously been relegated to the domestic sphere, entered the workforce in droves, becoming welders, riveters, and engineers, proving their indispensable role in the national effort. This was not just a war. It was a national mobilization on a scale never before witnessed, a testament to what a unified people can achieve when faced with an existential threat. Japan had hoped for a quick negotiation, a concession born of American shock and reluctance for a long war. But what they received was an unequivocal declaration of war, a commitment to total victory, no matter the cost, no matter the duration. The United States, with its vast natural resources, its immense industrial capacity, and its innovative spirit, was now fully committed. It was a race against time that Japan, with its limited resource base and already strained economy, was destined to lose. The initial Japanese advantage, born of surprise and meticulous planning, began to erode. The Pacific, once a pathway for Japanese expansion, slowly but surely became the arena for its reversal. The U.S. Navy, far from being crippled, rose from the ashes of Pearl Harbor, its crucial aircraft carriers, those symbols of future naval power, now leading the charge. They became the spearhead of a relentless counteroffensive, a strategic masterpiece of island hopping that systematically choked off Japan's supply lines, isolating its garrisons and pushing ever closer to the Japanese homeland. Each island captured, each battle won, was a brutal, hard-fought victory, but each one further depleted Japan's finite resources, its men, its ships, its aircraft, its fuel. The long war, the very scenario Japan had sought to avoid, was now its inescapable reality. The sheer scale of American production meant that for every ship Japan sank, America built two. For every plane shot down, dozens more rolled off the assembly lines. It was a war of attrition that Japan simply could not win. Their initial tactical brilliance had been undermined by a catastrophic strategic misjudgment of their adversary's resilience and capacity. The consequences were devastating, not just for Japan but for the world. Millions of lives were lost, cities were ravaged, and the global order was irrevocably altered. The war in the Pacific, ignited by the desperate gamble at Pearl Harbor, raged for nearly 4 years, a testament to the ferocity of the conflict and the immense stakes involved. Japan's empire, built on conquest and fueled by ambition, crumbled under the relentless pressure of the Allied forces. The ultimate lesson was stark: unchecked aggression, driven by a hunger for power and resources, can lead to fleeting initial gains, but inevitably invites a response that can be overwhelming and utterly ruinous. Yet, within this tragic history lies a powerful, enduring message for us all. It reminds us of the incredible human capacity for resilience, for unity in the face of adversity. It shows us that even the most devastating setbacks can ignite a profound strength, a collective will to overcome and to fight for what is right. The story of Pearl Harbor and its aftermath is a testament to the truth that true sustainable power isn't found in a single audacious strike, nor in the swift seizure of resources, but in the unwavering spirit of a people, their capacity to innovate, to adapt, to endure, and to rise stronger from the ashes of challenge. It teaches us that while ambition can drive progress, it must be tempered by wisdom, by empathy, and by a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of nations. For individuals and for nations, the path of aggression, even when seemingly offering quick solutions, often leads to prolonged suffering and ultimate defeat. True strength lies in collaboration, in foresight, and in the courage to seek peaceful, sustainable solutions to our challenges. Let us remember December 7, 1941. Not just as a date of infamy, but as a profound historical lesson. A lesson that reminds us of the perils of short-sighted ambition, but also, and perhaps more importantly, of the indomitable spirit of humanity. It is a reminder that even when faced with overwhelming odds, when the very foundations of our world seem to shake, we possess an incredible capacity to unite, to adapt, and to build anew. From the depths of despair, we can forge an unbreakable resolve, transforming tragedy into a catalyst for growth, understanding, and a renewed commitment to a future built on peace, cooperation, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The echoes of that fateful day call us to choose wisely, to act with foresight, and to always remember that the greatest victories are won not through domination, but through the unwavering pursuit of justice, resilience, and a shared humanity.